9 می سال 2000 10 می سال 2000 ساعت هم 1 رو به 11 با ناردو عزیز به همراه تورج داریم اینجا مصاحبه میکنیم. یا علی ناردو جان.
I remember in 1969 when I was going to the National University of Iran. In those days, being an intellectual, so to speak, meant being socially involved. You know, all intellectuals were either engagé or considered to be purely decadent. And of course, Persian literature is very committed, very engagé literature, especially its fiction as well as its new poetry. The cinema was soon to follow. Cinema came with modernism, basically. As literature was progressing, so was cinema. Some attempts were made at adapting certain literary works to the motion picture industry, some successful, some not so successful. For example, I've heard, I haven't seen this one because it was after my time, after I had left for the US, that someone made The Blind Owl, with Parviz Afandizadeh in it. I would admire such a man for daring to make a movie of The Blind Owl, but I can't imagine how he's done it, It's just not practical for the cinema. On the other hand, Dashakur, for example, I believe the motion picture is better than the story. The story is rather crude and sentimental, but the motion picture with the protagonist and the antagonist both being great actors, they pull it off quite well. I think Hidayat would have been pleasantly surprised to see that movie. Then you have Ghulam Hossein Saidi, who's very popular with the Iranian public as well as with the movie makers. Not only The Cow was a masterpiece, I heard that before making The Cow, the government had ordered them to white paint the village so as not to show its poverty. And still the misery is so overwhelming that you wonder what it would look like without being whitewashed. Another movie of his that was made, which I didn't appreciate very much, was Calmness in the Presence of Others, which was good acting basically, but it's not Saidi's style to get into a family like that. He's the kind of man with a heavy-duty Azeri accent, a psychiatrist who had a free clinic, was imprisoned by the Shah, tortured by the Shah's regime, and then, of course, the Islamic Republic went after him. And this guy was writing somewhere in I think, Aleppo issue, that one day when he was treating a poor woman in downtown Tehran, this woman said, God bless the Shah for putting you here for us. He said, I just looked at the lady, I didn't know what to say, How could I explain to her that I'm doing this on my own? The Shah just tortures me, it doesn't give me a free clinic to treat people. Anyway, Saidi's Gov, I think, is a masterpiece. Not only the story, but also the movie. I think it was brilliant of Merjoui to select this one of all the Azadarane Bayal stories, of all the mourners of Bayal stories. Because this one renders the misery of that village so perfectly, it's almost Kafkaesque in a sense, Whereas in classical Persian literature we have lots of metamorphoses, but the metamorphosis is usually from man to moth or to the butterfly around the candle, It's purely symbolic. It's not like it happens in modern Persian literature when it is not symbolic but evolutionary. So that in modern Persian literature you have Sag-i Velgar, the vagabond dog of Sadr Hidayat, which is impossible to make a movie of because you need a well-trained dog, And it's beautiful as a parable of man's exile from the Garden of Eden. You know, when the dog jumps out of the owner's car and gets lost and is, you know, absolutely all by its own, free but miserable. You know, and the thing that makes him leave the car is the scent of a bitch, a female dog, which is of course Adam and Eve. You know? And so he's exiled, and at the last scene, there are the vultures circumambulating him, and the dog is out of water, out of breath, and is just waiting for the vultures to descend, which is man's modern state of being. Or Antari که لوتیش مرده بود, you know, the baboon whose buffoon was dead by Sadegh Chubak, is once again an evolutionary creature, you know, another mammal, a monkey, a baboon to be precise, who's been addicted by his master, who's an opium smoker, so that he won't run away. And this, of course, the chain around his neck is religion. One thing that comes out of all these writers is the irony that when you look at them or read them or see the movies, as you please, you would not at all surmise that if there is going to be political change in Iran, it's going to be an Islamic revolution. Because they're all, one thing that they have in common with the Shah's government is they're both anti-clerical. Mm-hmm. And ironically, it was an Islamic republic which shocked most of them and proved to them how out of touch with their people they are, despite being committed to their people. Shamlu's poetry is a great example of that. In Gov, I think someone like Sartre would have gone crazy for Gov. Because if you want to be engagé and not be a propagandist, then you have to achieve some artistic level which will justify the message that you're trying to convey. Or else, if it's pure propaganda, then it's not literature. You're a pamphleteer, not a novelist or an author. And what Saidi has done here with Mashti Hassan is to show that in Bayal, the cow is far more vital to the livelihood of the people of the village, being its only cow, than is the individual Mashti Hassan who owns the cow. There are many individuals there in the village. One less, one more wouldn't make a difference. So Mashti Hassan's self-metamorphosis into the cow of Mashti Hassan when the cow dies would in itself be a masterpiece, but it becomes even more so in the movie when in the last scene, even his friends treat him like a cow, because they need a cow more than they need Mashti Hassan. So this kind of a conveyance via images on the screen is far more powerful than reading it as a short story in Azaderan Bayat. When you read it, perhaps half the people reading it would miss it. But in the movie, there's no way you can miss it. Another one that I liked very much was Dasha Kol, which, as I said, the movie was better than the story. The acting was superb, the directing was very good. It was a truly touching movie. In those days when we were going to the university, for pastime, aside from some westernized fun like discotheques and stuff like that, which most of the middle class was involved in, it was cinema, basically, what we did for fun. And the Iranian cinema, unlike American movie industry, had either good movies or bad movies, no gray area. Whereas majority of movies you see in America are middle, not very bad, not very good. In Iran, it was clearly divided between the Fardin and Nasser Malekmuti style or the Mehjui and Beizai and others. Some excellent movies were made. Not all of them were based on literature, so I regret that at that time I wasn't paying very much attention to who was the scenarist of certain movies. I would have liked to have known, for example, Hurut Bagh Sangi, or some other movies like that, which I thoroughly enjoyed, but know that they didn't appear as a work of fiction originally. What I do regret a lot is nothing was ever made of Iranian history. And Iranian history is a real source of pride for an Iranian who's aware of it. And most people aren't aware of it. Most people just have heard the names of the Achaemenids or the Sasanians or the Parthians. 99% don't even know who was the Surena, whereas you would make a great historical movie. I don't know, is it the budget problem that has prohibited them from making historical movies, or is it just an attempt to be modern that takes them away from history? And after all, if you look at the glorious Iranian history, you can't be anti-Shah, because the Shah is the hero par excellence in classical Iranian history. Even though you have kings like Orod who murdered the Surena out of jealousy, you still can't deal without the king. You're inevitably going to be stuck with the king, and your fellow intelligentsia are going to accuse you of being a royalist or a monarchist. Decadent, in short. Whereas I think there's still a lot that Hasanak Wazir, for example, would make a great movie. For some reason, they never made one. Or if they did, I never saw it. The Shahnameh is full of stories. The Masnavi is a source. Attar is a source. Lots of sources in classical Persian literature which has been totally neglected. When we come to the moderns, I think the author that was in the movies but didn't quite cut it, maybe because of the directors, you would know better perhaps, is Nader Ebrahimi. I think he has a lot of potential, or he had a lot of potential, but it somehow doesn't come out in the movie. His writing is far better than his movies. Another writer is Sadegh Chubak, of course. I liked the book, but I never liked Tangsir, the movie. I didn't like the idea of sending Behruz Busuri, the protagonist, like a cowboy in the sunset sailing away after killing a whole bunch of people. That's melodramatic. It didn't quite please me the way it should have. But it was a good choice to make that novel a movie, because you can't make Antarik Lutiash Mordevud, you can't make Ruz Awal Qabr. There are certain things that don't at all transfer into the cinema, especially after Hedayat originated the Persian style of stream of consciousness, which in Persian I think Reza Barani calls it Nahr Khudagahi. In Qisse Nevisi, Tangsir has very nice stream of consciousness episodes, especially when the Behruz Busuri character is in that Armenian's house, and the Armenian is protecting him. He's got this dreamlike sequence, which of course doesn't come out in a movie. In a movie, only the action conveys. And as action, it's not much of an original action. I liked Ragbar. There were some very great movies. One that I didn't see, but I've heard many controversial remarks about it, is Cheshme of Arbi Ovanesyan, The Spring. I don't know if it's a good movie or if it's a bad movie. I can't even find it to see. But I've heard that in Cinema Diamond, some people cut the chairs with knives, they were so upset, and some people praised it very highly. So, unless I see it, I don't know how to judge it. Whereas Bagh Sangi, for example, which is one of my all-time favorites, didn't make too much of a noise, but I think it's a real masterpiece. Especially when you consider Ashil Gorki's paintings of his small village in the Van area during the Armenian genocide when he was a little boy, and how he describes the scene in the gardens of Sochi. He says there was this garden with a tree that people went and put their rags on, and that you see it repeated in Bagh Sangi a few hundred miles away. Different culture, but same traditions continuing, there's a mythical reality to it, archetypal reality to it, something that is timeless. This for me is my favorite kind of art, something that has been with man for thousands of years and will be with man probably for as long as he lives. This worship of the Imamzadehs, for example, that occurs in almost every area of Iran, every village has an imamzadeh or something in the vicinity. These are certain sanctuaries for the people. This culture of the people, which Saidi addresses, by the way, in Azadarane Bayal, one of the stories is about such an imamzadeh, is very interesting. But it's amazing that these authors who knew this, how could they ignore it? They were writing for the poor class, but their audience was the middle and upper class who had the education to read and understand. Ahmad Shamli, for example, always insisted with me that one day he met a factory worker who knew his poetry by heart. He said, no, there are people like that who read my poetry. I'm sure there must have been one or two, but they're not the major audience. I was the major audience, and people like me were the major audience. And this audience already knew the problems of the country. They didn't need to hear it from Shamli. They already saw it, they knew it, they sympathized with him. So it's an inner circle, intelligentsia to intelligentsia for the masses who can't read. That's the irony. But here cinema comes in handy, because cinema can show you, and if you don't have the patience to read a book for 10 hours, you certainly can afford to see it for 2 hours. So that's why I think Shazde Ehtijab is such a movie. Shazde Ehtijab, if you read the book, it's almost impossible to realize that the Shazde is playing with Fakhri for revenge against Fakhrul-Nisa, who's the real intellectual and the conscience of the Qajar dynasty. Because Fakhrul-Nisa is humiliating the Shazde, Shazde humiliates Fakhri as Fakhrul-Nisa. But the story is very complicated. If you're not careful, you'll miss it altogether, as Golshi was becoming more and more difficult in his writings. For example, Hadith Morde Bardar Kardan al Savar ke Khahad Amad is an ambiguous, complex piece of parabolic work that is impossible to understand unless one knows Ghaznavid and Seljuk literature, unless one is familiar with Bayhaqi's vocabulary, Bayhaqi's whole worldview. In the movie, when Fakhri Khorvash plays both Fakhri and Fakhrul-Nisa, then it's obvious what is happening. There's no way you can miss what is happening. And it's interesting that Golshiri managed to publish Shazde Ehtijab with no censor problems. But when the movie came out, he was arrested and put in jail, because the censors also saw the movie and understood what was happening, whereas the novel had skipped the censors. Now, another problem that occurs is if you're smart enough to go beyond the censors, what portion of your audience is going to understand you? If the censors who are trained to catch you are fooled by you, certainly the majority of your readers or watchers are going to be fooled also and skip the whole point. So, in a way, as I said, it's an elitist literature. It's an intelligentsia-oriented literature because of all its complications, all its symbolism, etc., etc., etc. So even when you had ridiculous laws like the censor saying you can't use the word rose, gol sorkh, because of gol sorkhi, or shab, because of shabanah shamlu, they always found a way to create new games. They always found new symbols. Then divar became one of the words you couldn't use because of executions by the wall. So it became almost ridiculous. And after all is said and done, the ultimate irony was that the middle class, as Shamlu said, did the revolution or participated in the revolution from their windows or balconies. The real people in the street were people who probably don't like modern literature at all, or aren't familiar with it, or one of the geniuses of the contemporary cinema, Mohsen Makhmalbaf, I believe he had seen 2 or 3 movies before the revolution in all his life. They were the kind of people that started the revolution. And the movies that these people saw, I'm sorry to say, were mostly the Fardin kind of movies, cafe movies, fight and this and Kolam Akhmali and, Luti Gari kind of movies. Maybe they saw Dashakol, but I'm sure They won't be interested in golf. They would find it boring. Or Qaisar, maybe they would like, but they would prefer Reza Motori. No? Certain kind of people that you have to live with to know what I'm talking about. I can't describe them. They're not lower class, they're not bad people, they're not stupid people, but they're more interested in feeding their families than in cinema and literature or painting. You know, they've got priorities, so to speak. All of these high arts are a form of aristocratic pastime for people who can afford it. That's why the older generation of professors in Iran were all rich. Islami Nodushan, etc., etc. They were all wealthy people who could afford to become scholars, you know, independent money. You know, it was an aristocratic occupation. It wasn't paycheck-oriented occupation that we have in our days. At any rate, I'm very surprised, to be honest, and I know I'm supposed to be talking basically about the new wave and not post-Islamic revolutionary cinema, which I'm not qualified to say anything about anyway, that they've progressed so much. One would think that cinema and poetry would be the two that would get hurt most, and music would be the one that would progress most. Of course, music progressed, definitely music progressed. All the garbage went out and good classical Persian music is being played and songs are being sung. But the cinema, with all its restrictions, reminds me of the golden age of the ghazal, which I would say from Rumi to Hafiz. Okay? When you have restrictions, like ghazal has to be in a certain rhythm, has to be a certain number of lines, like you can't show a woman's hair in the cinema, or other restrictions that they put on the cinema, then perhaps you work better. You know, you're not as loose and running about all over the place. You know, you've got more form, more restrictions, more accuracy. You don't waste the screen. You know, you don't waste film by just filling in time. You know, it becomes precious. Every frame becomes precious. It's taken more seriously because you know you're not going to get too many opportunities, and you try to do the best you can. And the more the competition has grown, the better they become. Healthy inter-rivalry with them. I'm sorry that few directors made it from the Shah's time to this era. I wish more of them had come along, but I guess the best did. You know, the ones that didn't just couldn't pull it off. I'm glad Nejmi and Beyzai are two of my favorites that made it. Aside from that, what else can I say about the relationship between literature and cinema? Stories, ironically short stories and not novels, dominate the cinema. I don't know why, instead of taking a novel and making a movie, they prefer to take a story and expand it into a movie, when you've already got the screenplay in a novel, basically, you know, expanded version as the author wanted it to be. For a variety of reasons, I think Persian poetry has been hurt after the revolution. It's been hurt because poetry is basically, essentially song. And song is based on love. When the most primary love between a man and a woman is frowned upon or not looked positively upon, which apparently it's not, obviously it's not, poetry can't survive. You can write poetry about the martyrs of the war, you can write poetry about a variety of subjects, but the soul of it is gone. Fiction progressed for a while, and now it's sort of backing off a little bit because it became redundant. But the cinema is going full force, and I'm very happy for that. It's unfortunate that good foreign films are rare in Iran because of a variety of moral reasons or political reasons. I wish, and I'm sure the Iranian directors do see good foreign movies, either in festivals or on video or something, you know. But I wish the public would also become aware of what's happening in the rest of the world, because then they would truly appreciate that what is known as the Iranian cinema is absolutely unique. It's not French, it's not European, it's not South American, it's not Chinese, it's not American, it's purely Iranian. Even when you have a movie like this recent major movie that we saw in the Middle East Center about the middle class husband and wife, Hamun. Even a dilemma like that, which is purely modern and middle class, is its Iranian version of modern and middle class. You see? That family cannot be anywhere else. It can't be in Baghdad, it can't be in New York, it can't be in London. It has to be in Tehran. So, fortunately, thanks to a few very good early directors like Mezri and Bezai, and others, many others, if not many, at least a few, Iranian cinemas got a good start. The way it originally had begun with people like Samuel Khalchikian and others, it was going a sidetrack. It was going into dead end. And that dead end was exactly the kind of movies that are not being made in Iran anymore. That Fardin kind of coffin movies. Those movies, like every other audience all over the world, are appreciated by certain people who use the cinema as a sort of getaway from reality. Who want to go to a movie for 2 hours and forget what's outside the cinema going on. What's going on in their lives, in their families, in their with their children, at their jobs, everything. For 30 riyals, you could go and see a movie. If you wanted to buy some watermelon seed or lavash, really have fun for 2 hours and then get back into reality. But what these few directors that I mentioned above did was to bring reality into the movie, was to not divorce the cinema from the society. When you look at these caffeine movies, if anybody saw only these movies, they would think all Iranians drink, get in bar fights, that's all they do. That's their business, fall in love, pull out their knives against the girl's brother or something, ridiculous scenes like that, which of course did occur in society. But the major problems of society wasn't that group that went to the cafes. That group I knew. I was one of them. We used to go there and try to merge with the economically lower status, pretending that we were one of them. And of course that was just a small minority, because as the revolution showed, those people just disappeared, altogether. I don't know what they do these days for fun. They just went out. The majority of the masses didn't go to cafes, didn't drink. They prayed probably and fasted. Or if not, who was it? Anne-Marie Chimel, I think, said before the revolution people prayed at home and drank outside. After the revolution they drink at home and pray outside. Anyway, so I'm very happy for the Iranian cinema. I'm especially happy that literature and cinema have been going hand in hand, because in the West there is a tradition between the novel and the cinema that Iran didn't have before, because we didn't have novels. Our literature is poetry, essentially. Prose is for history, for science, which often was written in Arabic as a matter of fact, but poetry is our pure literature until the 1920s. After the 20s, when Persian literature started, and it was a very lively start, even though the first author, Jamalzadeh, isn't much of an author to speak about, but it was immediately followed by Chubak and Hedayat, which is a very good sign. And of course you have others like Ibrahim Golestan. Asar Ganj Darrinjani, for example, is an interesting movie, but not one of my favorites. Actually, to be honest with you, I don't like Iranian movies in color. Because when I was growing up in Iran, in the years when I was seeing the movies as they came out, they were all black and white. And when I see something color, I feel it's not mine. You know, it's another world's, another generation's. You know, not the one that I grew up with as a student or in my earlier days as a teacher. They're sort of strange, but as I said, Hamun, for example, is color, and I loved it very much. Maybe because of his director, who's one of my favorites. I think I've said all I had to say, basically, and there's very little I can add. Already, I think I've been redundant somewhat and repeated a few things a few times.
No conclusion, no.
No conclusion بودی.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Merci.